Good afternoon, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. American and Russian delegations have met in Saudi Arabia to discuss further steps concerning peace in Ukraine. The main point of interest this time is the renewal of the Black Sea Initiative. And to talk about it and more, we're joined by Aleksander Cwalina, Assistant Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and obviously expert in Ukrainian and Russian affairs. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, in your opinion, what's the current status of negotiations between the US and Russia?
Of course, latest reporting from the negotiation, even from the person from the Russian foreign, Maria Zakharova, currently says that the expectations for a breakthrough are the Russian and the U.S. delegations have been in conversation for approximately the past 8 hours or so, primarily to hammer out the details and the main Russian demands for the 30-day ceasefire on energy and infrastructure and on the possible renewal of the Black Sea Initiative.
So what does Russia want to achieve from the Black Sea Initiative? The renewal of this initiative, if I'm not mistaken, it has withdrawn from the very same initiative back in 2023. So what can happen now?
Sure. So this, as you mentioned, this was first passed. This deal was initially struck in July 2022, and that allowed for the safe export of Ukrainian grain as well as Russian fertilizer and agricultural products as well. Russia withdrew from this in 2023 as Moscow claimed that its own food and fertilizer was having issues getting to market, not particularly due to agricultural sanctions or restrictions, as that was exempt from many of the sanctions placed on Russia, but rather due to restrictions on payment, which Russia is still locked out of SWIFT international payment systems, and also logistics and insurance complications, according to Moscow. My main takeaway from this is I believe most likely Russia is looking to diversify its flailing economy, which is currently on a very strict military footing, and is completely based on the sort of oil and gas and military, which is due to Ukrainian strikes on this infrastructure, and also due to lack of exports, is seeing a recent downturn. I also see this as a look to possibly diversify its economy towards the West and towards international markets writ large. I believe the Kremlin has sort of seen a possibility to put its foot in the door for a possible reset with the United States and in turn with Europe on possible oil and gas trade, but also with extending to agricultural fertilizer and further economic trade with the US and the West. This is also a sign that Russia is possibly testing the waters and how much it can extract from the United States, and also if there's Ukrainian reciprocity for a possible deal that can be struck between just the United States and Russia as well, and how that is possibly slated to pan out.
Right, so we know how would it serve Russia's interests, but would it also help Kiev?
Of course, I believe sort of easing the tensions and easing strikes in the Black Sea is beneficial for both parties, and this is possibly why this has been sort of the first foot in the door for negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. However, the Black Sea is also not seen a large amount of conflict recently after Ukraine successfully pulled off many drone and maritime attacks on the Russia's Black Sea Navy. This has seen a drastic downturn of conflict in the Black Sea and on Russian military capabilities in the Black Sea. However, Russia has continued to attack Ukrainian port infrastructure in both the Black Sea and the Danube, which has limited Ukrainian exports of grain and infrastructure, not to a level that it was at the beginning of the war, but certainly at a level that is hurting the Ukrainian economy.
Let's talk about energy infrastructure now. Is it possible that Russians will, in fact, obtain the Zaporizhzhia power plant for good?
The Zaporizhzhia power plant currently is under Russian occupation, but one interesting thing of note in the past couple of weeks is the renewed U.S. interest towards possible concessions and terms for peace negotiations. And within those, apparently, Washington and the Trump administration floated the possible U.S. control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, according to the readouts from the Trump-Zelensky call last Wednesday. Zelensky said that U.S. ownership of the plant is not currently on the table, highlighting that it is currently under Russian occupation and is not operating at a full capacity. However, American ownership of the power plant could place that under U.S. protection and benefit Ukraine, the European Union, and the United States. Particularly as if the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is under U.S. protection, is under Western protection, is able to operate at a much more efficient scale, bring energy and economic benefit to Ukraine, but also to the European Union, to which it exported excess energy to previously. I believe this sort of move, at least from the Trump administration, mirrors the previous interest in the Ukrainian critical minerals, as in this is a sign of the Trump administration's interest and financial incentive in continued cooperation and work within Ukraine and with Ukraine. And this is broadly acceptable to increase U.S. economic interest and ties in Ukraine, but maintains to be logistically difficult on both fronts as Russia continues to strike and occupy Ukrainian energy and mineral infrastructure, and there seems to be little appetite from the United States currently on putting troops on the ground or putting a solid security deterrent for Russia to protect these infrastructure.
Right, we've reached you in Washington, D.C. Now, I'd like to ask you that, both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, accuse each other of breaking the terms of this partial ceasefire. Now, what does it look what does it look like from the American perspective?
Sure. I believe the perspective from Washington currently is that an energy infrastructure sort of has been pared down between the Trump and Zelensky calls that initially called for a 30-day full ceasefire. It was Putin that initially pared this down to just an energy infrastructure ceasefire, which Ukraine agreed to. An energy infrastructure ceasefire to this end would be beneficial for both sides. Russia has been targeting Ukrainian energy and heating infrastructure throughout the war in efforts to disrupt the country's energy supply and to demoralize Ukraine's population. But Ukraine has also conducted extensive drone and missile strikes on oil and gas facilities deep in Russia to both impact Russia's ability to wage war and to impact Russia's main financial source to finance its war machine. As mentioned in the previous calls, Ukraine supports movements towards peace and an energy ceasefire and the initial U.S. proposed ceasefire. Kiev has also indicated that it will only agree to an official 30-day pause if a formal document was signed. This comes after, Kiev's multiple year, decades-long experience with Russia and Moscow signing an agreement and then going back in a couple of days and then blaming Ukraine for violating that ceasefire or that agreement in the first place. So this is something that I think Washington is watching closely. And it is important to note also that Russia is continuing to strike Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and is accusing Ukraine of striking similar infrastructure under the ceasefire. From Washington, I think the Trump administration is primarily looking for any cessation or ceasefire to hold, primarily to exemplify progress on the negotiations, which looks good in Washington and for Trump and for the Trump administration. And I believe that Ukraine has shown willingness to both play ball on the previous full 30-day ceasefire and on an energy ceasefire. It is up to Moscow to not only hammer out their side of the negotiations in both today and to have that drawn up in official backed agreement by both Ukraine and the United States. Today will hopefully add more clarity on both.
Right. Now, the Bloomberg agency claims that Donald Trump would like to announce peace in Ukraine before Easter this year and therefore set the date for April 20th. Now, how realistic is this date?
I think I mean, Trump has promised that he'd end the war initially, 24 hours upon assuming office. That has certainly been, it's been certainly more than that. I think this is primarily up to Russia. It currently seems that Russia will maintain its maximalist goals as they relate to the war. For example, during the Trump-Putin phone call, Putin signaled that Russia would only agree to a truce if Ukraine stopped mobilizing soldiers, if Ukraine stopped training troops, and if Ukraine stopped importing Western weapons. From the United States, Putin also sought the halt of foreign military aid and of U.S. and Western intelligence to Ukraine. However, Ukraine has responded with its own red lines to these possible negotiations. This comes after a similar phone call between Zelensky and Trump after the Putin-Trump phone call, in which Ukraine has set out its red lines, which include that Kyiv will not accept Russian sovereignty over occupied territory. This includes the occupied territory to the east and continued non-recognition of Crimea. That Ukraine will not agree to be blocked from possible future NATO accession. That Kyiv will not agree to reduce the size of its military, and that any sort of peace agreement in the future must include security guarantees as any sort of part of a peace deal. Um, as you can tell from the outline of both, that these seem to be in direct contradiction. However, after the tumultuous White House meeting between President Zelensky and President Trump, those sort of disagreements have somewhat cooled, and Zelensky and Kiev has shown that it's willing to play ball with Washington in regard to the negotiation. However,
Well,
the main question remains of whether Putin and Russia is willing to play.
it seems that there's more to it. Well, Ukraine has attacked targets in Russia with the use of US-made ATACMS long-range missiles. Now, the question is, was this a new delivery? And is therefore Washington trying to put some pressure on the Kremlin?
This could be a possible sort of behind the scenes motivation from Washington to continue to put additional pressure on Russia in these continued negotiations. However, I believe as President Trump mentioned in his previous Truth Social post, that his current method of attack is economic on Russia to maintain the guardrails of Russia to play ball on these negotiations, and this includes either maintaining the current sanctions on oil and gas and on payment systems on Russia, or if Russia steps out of line and is seen as to be stalling on these negotiations, tightening the screws on both loopholes and oil and
Vladimir
gas
Putin has
exports.
already stated that Western sanctions are here to stay. So I guess we should prepare for a prolonged negotiations, if not prolonged conflict. Aleksander Cwalina, Assistant Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, an expert in Ukraine and Russian affairs, was our guest today. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and comments here on TVP World.